Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this presentation. In this training or in this class, I'm going to specifically talk about carriage and transportation, what we call freight. And here we are focusing on the international business transaction law, but particularly on carriage and transport. So when you talk about carriage and transport, we are saying we're looking at the law that governs these people who like the three-way shipping companies, DHL, FedEx, those companies that are involved in transporting the goods from one area to another. And in international business transactions, in particular here, I want to focus on the contract of carriage, of marine carriage especially. But before we focus in on marine, when we talk about a contract of carriage, we're saying that one person, for example, four-way shipping company, three-way shipping company, Transami, those guys agree with you to transport your car from China to Uganda, or they agree to transport your pineapples from Uganda to Europe. So the carrier is that person who does the transportation. And carriage or transportation can be by air, road, rail, or sea, whichever mode you prefer to use. So each of these modes of transportation have specific rules and laws that govern them. But let us first look at let us look at the duty of the carrier of these transport guys, whether it's by road or sea or rail. What is their responsibility in law? The number one responsibility in law is for them to effect conveyance, to transport the goods. Basically, they are required in law to move the goods from one place to another. So a carrier is liable for loss or damage if the goods are damaged when they are in his care, when he's transporting them. And he has the burden to prove that the loss that occurred was not under his watch. It was not his fault. Because if it is established that it was his fault, then he must compensate the buyer for those goods or the seller for those goods. So the contract of carriage is really specifically concerning the safety of the goods as they are moved by the shippers or the carriers or the air freight people. And that is what the contract is all about. So the second duty is to convey within the agreed time, to transport these goods within the agreed time. The parties agree that you will bring the container from China to Mombasa within this period of time. So the law requires the person who's bringing those goods, the freighter, they are required to deliver within the agreed time. And if we did agree on an agreed time, they must be delivered within a reasonable time. Okay, so that's why we say if no time is agreed, the delivery should be within a reasonable time. If it's carried by sea and we didn't agree on the timing, then it has to be without unreasonable delay. The third duty of a carrier or the transporter is to deliver the goods to their actual destination. If you've contracted the guys to bring the goods to Mombasa, they must deliver them to you in Mombasa, not deliver them in another place, Kisumu, for example. So it is by law required that the contract of a carrier requires them to produce the goods to the destination that has been agreed upon. If it's delivered to the wrong destination, you, the owner, can claim that they particularly bring it back and deliver it where they were supposed to deliver it, or even can say they didn't deliver, they should compensate you for damages because they didn't bring it to their destination you agreed to. Now, these companies, the transporters, in law, they are allowed to exclude liability, to say that yes, we are transporting your goods, but we transport them at your own risk. Now, if in the law of contract, you must have covered exclusion of liability, exclusion clauses. This is really what we are talking about. That the transporter has the right in not to exclude liability or to say I'm transporting them at your own responsibility. And this is usually through a receipt or expressly before the contract is made. So the exclusion of liability must be put in the contract of carriage. It must be produced at the time the contract is being signed. And the clause that can be used is that the carriage is made at the owner's risk, or that the carrier is not liable for loss or injury that results as a result of certain problems or perils. So the carrier can list the perils, maybe acts of God or fire or war. The carrier has the liberty to list the perils. They are saying, however, that clauses like goods are transported at owner's risk don't completely protect the carrier where loss is caused by the willful negligence or misconduct of the carrier. So if the carrier is negligent or lazy or is not careful and the goods are damaged, even if this exclusion exists, the law will not protect the transporter because it was because of his willful negligence. If you look at this case, Citrus Board versus SAR. The board sued SAR for damages from destruction of goods that were in transit of lemons and oranges. The contract said that the consignment was transported at the owner's risk, so they had the exclusion clause there. It appeared that SAR and H movers, while they were moving the operations, they disregarded certain safety regulations on braking, although they were very well aware of them. So as a result of this, a number of loaded trucks ran off a steep slope and collided with a stationary engine, and goods got damaged. Court said that the movers' persistent disregard of the rules in question was willful misconduct. So it allowed these guys to to sue, and they were liable for destruction of the consignment. So what this case is really saying is that if you have been permitted as a transporter to exclude liability, you must still be careful. It doesn't mean that you remain negligent and you're not concerned about the transportation you are doing. We also have the air carriage, carriers by air. For example, if you're sending flowers to Europe or pineapples, or usually people who use air carriage to transport goods, they are carrying perishables, matoke, from Uganda, or flowers, things that perish easily. They will employ maybe Emirates to take the goods, or Das Air Cargo, or any other cargo airlines, So the law says that these airlines also have rules they're supposed to follow when they're carrying goods, or even just passenger goods. For example, you're coming back and your suitcase is on the line, it's on the aircraft. They have rules that they're supposed to follow. And those rules are governed by the Warsaw Convention. If you've heard about the Warsaw Convention, it provides the liability of the air carrier. So the air carrier can limit their liability just like the carrier by marine or by water. But the law says that if it proves that he took necessary care, or his agents took all the necessary measures, and it was impossible to avoid the problem, then they will not be responsible. So, for example, they could say that the wind was impossible, the airline crashed, or the cargo was destroyed, and couldn't do anything about the wind, or this bird came out of the blue and entered the turbine. Then they can prove that they are not responsible for the damage of the goods. Other than that, they are required to do all reasonable processes to make sure that the goods are moved from one place to another safely. The other exclusion they can have is if they prove that the loss that was caused to the goods came about because of you, the owner's negligence. For example, maybe you sealed the things badly and they got spoiled. Maybe you put them in a weak container and the caveat got torn while they were carrying them. So if they prove that the negligence was not a result of their mistake, then they are excluded from liability. And this liability is also excluded at the point of ticketing, or at the point of being payment, when you're making payment for the air travel. So let us now look at the carrier by sea. A carrier by sea has absolute liability. In other words, we are saying there's no, even if it's not a fault on his part, the carrier by sea generally in law is fully responsible for damage for goods at sea. That's why we mean by absolute liability. That without any explanation on the face of it, he is responsible if goods are damaged while they're on the sea. Unless he can prove that the damage was because of your negligence, the person who gave him the goods, that you sealed them badly again, or you didn't pack them well, or they were expiring shortly thereafter, or you pack them badly, then the carrier at sea can avoid the negligence. Can avoid the responsibility. Or if the carrier at sea could prove that some event that could not be foreseen, for example, bad weather, a fire, an earthquake happened, a tsunami came, and there's nothing they did not plan it, they did not see it, and it caught them, then they can be protected in law from responsibility for damaged goods. The other third point is inherent vice. Inherent vice is where something gets spoiled by its very nature. For example, the goods deteriorate by their very nature before they arrive. Maybe they're oranges, and oranges, maybe if they spend 30 days on water, they will get spoiled by their very nature, and you've put them on water for 30 days. The law says that in that way, the carrier by sea will not be responsible. They will be absolved from responsibility. So their liability, other than that, other than those 3 points, their liability is absolute. In other words, there's no defense to goods that are damaged on sea for carriers by sea. So the instances where a carrier by sea can exclude liability, even if the general law is that they have absolute liability. We are saying that this happens where there is loss that happens from unseaworthiness of the ship, and the carrier did everything possible at the beginning of the voyage to make sure the ship is in good condition. In other words, the ship is in good condition, everything was done to make sure it is in good condition, and en route the ship falls apart. Then the carrier by sea cannot be responsible for damage because the unseaworthiness of the ship could not be predicted. As far as they were concerned, they had done their best. And then also where loss or damage arises from acts of God. When we call by acts of God, these are acts that just arise without anyone knowing they will come, without anyone able to control them, like tsunamis or lightning. Imagine the lightning knocks the ship into two. All those wars, if there is war, if there are riots, those are things that frustrate the contract, and therefore in that case the carrier by sea is protected, even if the general law says that they have absolute liability. So the way it would work is that on the face of it, the carrier by sea is guilty fully, unless he can prove that the loss was by these acts of God, specific causes in law, or that the ship was not seaworthy, yet he knew it was seaworthy. But other than that, the carrier by sea has absolute liability. So what is the duty of the owner of the goods? The duty, like remember, the duty of a buyer is really to repay payment. That is their most important point, to make payment and to receive the good. So the obligation to pay falls due as soon as delivery has been done at the destination. And the carrier is entitled to retain the goods until they are paid. He could even hire premises to store those goods if he's not yet paid. And when he hires premises, that price will eventually be pushed on to the buyer. So the duty of the buyer, of the owner of the goods or the buyer, is really to make payment once the goods have delivered. To take delivery when the goods are delivered, and to make payment when they have been delivered. So you find in several instances when these transporters receive the goods for transportation, they are not ready to move right away that very day. So usually when they receive them, they put them in a warehouse. Now, by putting them in a warehouse, the transporters are entering into a contract of storage with the warehouse owner. And the warehouse owner therefore now becomes the depository, and the depositor is the transporter. He's putting the goods in the care of the depository, who's the warehouse owner, to keep these goods until the transporter is ready to put them on the ship to arrive. So a carriage of goods usually involves warehousing, and the warehousing is usually done by the transporter while the goods are en route before they arrive. So this contract of storage can be either expressed by you just putting the goods there, nothing in writing, or it can be implied. I beg your pardon. The contract is implied by you putting the goods there, there's nothing in writing, or it can be expressed where there's a written contract between the warehouse owner and the transporter. So for it to be implied, there must be at least delivery of the goods to the depository. In other words, once the goods have been put there, it is implied in law that there is a contract of storage. And the effect of this contract in law is that the other person, the warehouser, is going to keep these goods for you until you return to take them. In other words, they are not going to just take them and own them. There's no transfer of property. They are just keeping the goods until when you need them to put them on the ship or where they need to go. So this concludes the discussion on freight and storage. I've tried to keep it simple. I hope you can pause the slides and read them through, but my explanation is really to make it as simple as possible so that you're not bogged down in so much of the legalese, because this is really a slide presentation that's meant for business students, not so much law students. And this should be supplemented with the notes we gave to you in class, which are more detailed than just these presentations. So thank you for watching. I have one more video for you on insurance, and that will be the end.